23 others injured in a terrorist attack. He has vowed to protect the Jewish community and reinforce security in synagogues across the United Kingdom. Israel has deported 4 Italian activists from the Gaza-bound Global Sumud flotilla and has intercepted all boats, including one with Greta Thunberg. This has sparked global protests in countries like Italy, Turkey and Bangladesh. Egyptian Foreign Minister Badr Abdulati has stated that Cairo, along with Qatar and Turkey, are pressing Hamas to accept US President Donald Trump's ceasefire proposal to end the nearly 2-year war in Gaza. The proposal was unveiled by the White House and calls for a hostage prisoner exchange, the withdrawal of Israeli forces and the disarmament of Hamas. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar has rejected US President Donald Trump's 20-point Gaza plan, stating that the plan published by the White House differs from the draft that was proposed to Muslim-majority countries. Trump's plan aims to end the war, but he has now claimed that significant changes were made without Pakistan's consent. French Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu has announced that he will not use Article 49, Clause 3 of the Constitution to pass the budget without a parliamentary vote, insisting that lawmakers must reach a compromise. The Prime Minister has stressed that in a recently renewed parliament, forcing legislation is no longer acceptable. Russia launched a massive overnight attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure using 381 drones and 35 missiles, targeting key gas facilities in Kharkiv and Poltava regions. Now, the attack struck several areas in eastern Ukraine, but authorities have not yet released details on the extent of the damage that has been caused. Madagascar's capital, Antananarivo, has been placed under heavy security by riot police ahead of new anti-government protests against President Andry Rajoelina. Protesters are led by Young Generations movement and backed by unions and opposition parties have demanding President Rajoelina's resignation over failed basic services and corruption. The death toll from Typhoon Boloi in Vietnam has now risen to 51, with 14 missing and 164 injured. Meanwhile, the central bank is urging other banks across the country to support affected businesses, while the storm has caused an estimated $603 million in damage. Alright viewers, those are the headlines, and our top focus. Residents in Manchester have reacted to the terror attack that had taken place at the synagogue in the city. This comes as 2 people were killed as a result of the attack which took place on the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur. The attack has been described by the police as a terrorist incident, and the Greater Manchester Police has confirmed the identity of the attacker as Jihad al-Shami, a UK citizen of Syrian origin who was shot dead by police officers. Let's in fact listen in to what some of the residents of Manchester have had to say.
Yeah, I know the community very well. I'm part of the local Jewish community. I've got friends who were there. I've got somebody in my community that I know. My daughters are at school with his daughters who was injured. It was something waiting to happen. The rates of anti-Semitism in the last couple of years in this country and all over the world have grown massively. And, unfortunately, we are not surprised by what happens. It's horrific. It shouldn't have happened, but we weren't surprised that it did happen.
That ain't gonna work. Simply, my word is what's going on in Palestine. That's why this happened. Everyone knows that. Yeah. When someone say, "Oh, someone had a personal beef, someone come in and done that," no, it doesn't work like that. It didn't happen like that. It happened because what's going on there.
Alright viewers, with that we shift our focus away from the United Kingdom towards what's happening in the Middle East. A crew member from the flotilla that was headed towards Gaza has stated that their vessel named Summertime was forced to change course to avoid being attacked by Israeli authorities. He has stated that the vessel was diverted to the Cypriot port of Larnaca, where they were seeking support from the public and authorities. Let's in fact listen in to what this particular crew member has had to say.
We're in Larnaca for the support of the people and for the support of the government, whose I believe, like the European government, are on the side of the law and not outside of the law, to try and enforce international law and international observation of international, violation. And we have doctors, we have journalists, we have people on board who are documenting all the violation that happened in the sea. And in fact, we had to make a maneuver because we were going to be attacked and kidnapped as well. This act is an act of solidarity, so we can be together if anybody is attacked, and we have to obey the law, and nobody's above the law. Nobody have the right to be a pirate of the sea and enforce whatever they want to do. And I think we are equal. We are doing things legally. We're not violating international law. We came to Larnaca within the law of the Larnaca and the Cyprus Authority. We're obeying European law, international law. We are doing everything legal, nothing illegal. And in fact, everything that illegal that's been done against us was done in high seas in international water, and we were kidnapped.
This all comes as Israel intercepted the last remaining ship sailing to Gaza, which was part of the Sumud flotilla. Meanwhile, the interception has been met with international condemnation. Thousands of people have rallied across the world from Italy to Turkey to Bangladesh to protest against Israel's action. With us on the broadcast is Mohammed Osman, International Relations Specialist, joining us from Cairo. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. We've just heard what some of the activists on board one of the flotillas that rerouted to Cyprus has had to say. He emphasized repeatedly that those activists who are a part of the flotilla are abiding by international law. They're abiding by European law as well. Therefore, in your view, what are the legal consequences for Israel's actions, the fact that they stopped the flotilla in international waters? Do you think any state whose citizens have been a part of the flotilla will move the international court against Israel's actions?
Thank you for having me, Pia. Well, the short answer to your question is no. If Israel is not being held accountable for committing genocide in Gaza and killing over 66,000 people, 80% of them civilians, mostly women and children, then of course they will not be held accountable for intercepting a few boats and vessels that were making their way to the genocide-struck Gaza Strip in order to carry out a symbolic gesture of breaking the siege and presenting humanitarian aid to the beleaguered Palestinian population in Gaza. As you know, Pia, this is not the first time such an attempt has happened, even though this is the largest. This flotilla was composed of 44 vessels of different sizes, and it had about 500 or 470 activists and humanitarian workers and journalists and European members of parliament on board. And of course, it seeks to penetrate the siege and present humanitarian aid. Before that, in July, there was a boat that was intercepted and the activists were arrested a few months earlier. One such boat was making its way to the Gaza Strip, and it was targeted with a drone strike near Malta in international waters, which of course is a blatant violation of international law. This is a civilian vessel which was targeted by military means, and it was a peaceful vessel. Of course, it was not armed. None of those people were armed. But this time they intercepted all the vessels. They arrested over 400 people, and they weren't content with arresting them. They took them to Ashdod port, where they were incarcerated, and then the Minister of National Security, Itmar Ben-Gvir, the radical right-wing Zionist member of the governing coalition and the Minister of National Security, went into the place where they were imprisoned, and he taunted them and described those humanitarian workers and activists as terrorists, and that they are getting what they deserve. And of course, those activists probably will be deported to their home countries. So I think what we have seen, Pia, is an expression of Israel's complete impunity, They can act with impunity because they can evade the consequences of their actions. They are not being held accountable. And even when measures were taken by the United Nations through the International Court of Justice to hold Israel accountable, not even to punish it, but just to call upon it to take certain measures to prevent the commission of the crime of genocide in Gaza over a year ago. What happened was Israel completely ignored the ICJ ruling and went ahead with its killing spree in the Gaza Strip, where the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants against Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant on account of the egregious human rights violations in the Gaza Strip and the violations of international humanitarian law and the commission of war crimes. What happened was the United States imposed sanctions on the prosecutor general of the International Criminal Court and its judges, and now the court is being basically persecuted and besieged by American lawfare of some sort. So and even Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territories, an independent expert appointed by the UN Human Rights Council with a mandate elected by the members of the council, she was subjected to unilateral US sanctions as well because of her support of the legal proceedings against Israel. So we are seeing states led by the United States who ensure that Israel will never be held accountable on account of its crimes. So I hardly doubt, Pia, that them intercepting a few civilian vessels and arresting the people on board will have any considerable consequences.
And speaking of the arrests, we're also learning that 20 foreign journalists have now been detained. That's not all. Yesterday, we found out that a Doctors Without Borders medic, an occupational therapist, was killed while waiting for a bus in Deir al-Balah. Now, the death toll is mounting. Journalists, doctors are also in the crossfire as well. What then, in your opinion, is the need of the hour to ensure that all of this ends, to ensure that a ceasefire is put in place urgently?
I think that President Trump has put a proposal on the table. And as I said before on your respectable broadcast, it is far from perfect. It's not even good. It's a very bad deal. It's a very bad proposal. However, it is reflective of the current balance of power on the ground, and it is something that could be workable. Anything that stops the bloodshed in Gaza and stops the complete annihilation of whatever is left of the Gaza Strip's infrastructure and civilian population, I think this should be taken into account, and this agreement should be taken seriously and applied, and then even further discussed during application. The most important thing is reaching a ceasefire, because as you just said, Pia, the humanitarian situation in Gaza is terrible. We have tens of thousands of deaths, and there are reports by international organizations and agencies and research centers that actually estimate that the actual death toll in Gaza might be 3 or 4 times higher than the actual documented deaths in Gaza, which means that we could be speaking in a statistic that, or figures that will surpass the hundreds of thousands. And this is very plausible given the scale of destruction of Gaza. 80% of Gaza's civilian infrastructure has been completely eradicated. 70% of hospitals and medical institutions are out of service. Hundreds of journalists have been murdered. Not even like over 200 journalists have been killed in Gaza so far, if I'm not mistaken. And this number did not even die in the Second World War. And in the Second World War, it caused the death of 70 million people. Yet, not among them 200 journalists. However, in Gaza, Israel has created a new precedent and set a new record. And of course, medical personnel are being targeted. Even UN personnel, UNRWA, the UN Refugee Relief Agency, a UN specialized agency, their personnel and their buildings and their assets are being targeted by Israel incessantly. Over 300 UN personnel, UN staff died in the Israeli war of aggression against Gaza. So as you can see, even though Israel has to be held accountable, maybe someday they will be held accountable, especially now that many countries in Europe, for example, are turning on Israel and attempting to ostracize Israel from the international community, even though they're not owning up to these measures by applying sanctions, which are the most important measure that should be taken. However, it is a move in the right path. But what is even more important than accountability at this point is seizing the bloodshed. And this requires a ceasefire. Therefore, Israel and Hamas have to take into account Trump's settlement plan or ceasefire plan very seriously.
All right, sir. With that, I would like to thank you for taking out time sharing your perspective with us on NewsX World. With that, viewers, we're shifting our focus towards Indonesia and what's transpiring as far as the rescue operations in the tragic school building collapse is concerned. We're now learning that search and rescue teams in Sidoarjo on the Indonesian island of Java have recovered a total of 10 bodies from the rubble of the collapsed school. This has taken place 4 days after the tragedy. Now, despite intensive efforts, dozens of students still remain unaccounted for, with hopes for finding survivors now fading. The Al-Khozni Islamic Boarding School, a century-old institution, collapsed on Monday while construction crews were adding to unauthorized floors. Now, rescue workers initially searched by hand but have since deployed heavy machinery to speed up recovery efforts, but there has been no sign of life. About 105 students were injured, many with severe head injuries and broken bones, while 55 remain missing under the debris. They are unaccounted for at this time. With us on the broadcast is Mr. Ross Feingold, political analyst joining us from Taipei. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. The 72-hour golden window, the very crucial period where typically most survivors are found, that has already passed by. It's been 4 days since this terrible tragedy has taken place in East Java. But what this incident has done at the crux is raise a lot of questions about the structural safety and also the protocol that was overlooked while construction was taking place. We are learning that construction crews were in fact adding to unauthorized floors. Now, the regulations were clearly overlooked. So, what in your assessment should the local government bodies and the Indonesian government bodies do at large to ensure that such disasters, which are preventable, do not occur in the future?
You've identified the core issue here, which is that the local government was remiss in enforcing regulations at the local level, but ultimately, politically, this is going to flow back to the national government of Indonesia, especially at a time when the government of President Prabowo Subianto is under a lot of pressure. There were the recent protests about a variety of issues, including issues related to a school lunch program, issues related to corruption, issues related to allowances for members of parliament. So the national government is under tremendous pressure to basically improve their game. And this terrible tragedy happens at just the worst time for President Prabowo Subianto and his government. But even though this is, again, it's an issue that really should have been handled at the local level, but ultimately it's going to flow to the national level. And I'm sure we'll see national government officials say that we're going to do more, we're going to enforce regulations better, we're going to put pressure on local governments. So we'll see that kind of political show from senior politicians. Whether or not it'll actually bring about significant change, of course, that remains to be seen. Keeping in mind that this is not the first time that such kind of tragedies have occurred in Indonesia, where afterwards it was determined that infrastructure or buildings were not built in accordance with applicable regulations.
Indeed, you've clearly stated that this is likely to hurt Prabowo Subianto in the near future. But in your opinion, is it going to be a more grassroots-oriented criticism from the people itself, from the activists on the ground, or will opposition parties also capitalize on this tragedy, or would they avoid doing so, considering the nature of this incident?
Politics being politics, including in a democratic society like Indonesia, I would expect that not only would there be grassroots opposition, which could manifest itself in renewed protests, including in the capital, Jakarta, but I would expect opposition politicians to also try to benefit from this. Again, that would be typical in any democratic society. But keeping in mind that despite the protests or the presence of some opposition parliamentarians, President Prabowo Subianto really does control the government. That's not at risk at the moment, no matter how intense protests might become over the short term. So I think his approach is going to be, again, his government's going to say, we're going to do something about this. We're going to put more resources into enforcing regulations. We'll make more money available for local governments to do so. But what will be the result of that, only time will tell.
Indeed. And my last and final question, then, the takeaways from what has transpired, is it enough to say that regulatory frameworks and having good frameworks in the first place do not ensure, safety and security, but because at the end of the day, it's the functioning of the local bodies, it's the implementation of these frameworks is what determines whether such an incident takes place or not?
That's a really interesting question, especially in the context of Indonesia, because this tragedy occurred at an Islamic school, and Islamic schools play a very important role in the education system. And parents and local government officials give enormous deference to these schools and really avoid, there's a history of avoidance of intervention in how these schools operate, including in how they add facilities or do construction on their campus. So whether or not officials want to criticize or intervene in these Islamic schools, that's an ongoing issue in Indonesia, and I would not expect it to be solved in the near term.
All right, so with that, I would like to thank you for taking out time, sharing your insights and analysis with us on NewsX World. With that, viewers, we're shifting focus towards more developments that we're tracking. The European Union is urging calm in Morocco, where anti-corruption protests have turned deadly. At least 3 people have been killed in recent demonstrations, which have drawn large numbers of young people demanding greater accountability from the government. Now, speaking in Brussels, EU Foreign Affairs spokesperson Anwar El Anouni has stressed the importance of youth participation in public life and has called on all parties to avoid further violence. He welcomed the Moroccan authorities and stated openness to dialogue, while also extending condolences to the families of those who've been killed. Now, the protests are amongst the most significant public demonstrations that Morocco has seen in recent years, and widespread frustration with corruption and governance is what has driven these protesters to take to the streets.
Nous reconnaissons l'importance de la participation des jeunes à la vie publique et appelons toutes les parties prenantes à maintenir le calme. Dans ce contexte, nous saluons l'ouverture au dialogue exprimé par les autorités marocaines. Nous regrettons les actes de violence perpétrés lors des récentes manifestations et adressons nos condoléances aux familles des victimes.
Luxembourg's Grand Duke Henry is set to abdicate the throne, ending a 25-year reign and passing the sovereignty to his eldest son, Guillaume. The ceremony will be held at the Grand Ducal Palace, after which the new Grand Duke will swear an oath before Luxembourg's parliament. As Grand Duke Guillaume assumes the throne, Luxembourg's Prime Minister Luc Frieden has stated that he will bring a new style to the monarchy while also ensuring continuity with past leaders. Luxembourg's PM has also noted that the ceremony is a historic moment and will be marked by the attendance of leaders from neighboring European nations. Listen in.
Je crois qu'il y aura une combinaison d'un nouveau style, parce que le futur grand-duc a 30 ans de moins que son père. Il a été éduqué à l'école luxembourgeoise, contrairement à son père qui avait encore des cours privés quand il était à l'école. Donc ce sera un nouveau style, plus ouvert peut-être, mais dans la continuité de son père et de son grand-père.
Et maîtrisant.
Du tout, je crois que c'est un très grand moment historique. Il y aura l'abdication du grand-duc Henri, il y aura la sermentation du nouveau grand-duc Guillaume, et puis il y aura de très grandes fêtes populaires le week-end qui suit l'avènement au trône du nouveau grand-duc. Donc,
Residents of Luxembourg have welcomed the change, expressing excitement about the public festivities and celebrations surrounding the new Grand Duke's accession. Let's in fact listen in.
Our best. The last one keeps presenting us well, promoting our country and being there for the people.
The world is going topsy-turvy at the moment. Hope Luxembourg can really have a stand and be on the right side of the decisions. And yeah, for the people of Luxembourg, we expect good decisions from him.
It's important, yes, because they are there for all the people, for the young, for the old. They try to encourage social stability and take care that everybody is welcome and gives his part to contribute to the wealth and the welfare of everybody. It is a wonderful occasion to celebrate Luxembourg, and we are very happy, as well as with the existing Grand Duke and his wife and a family. And it's a nice thing that they do it while they are in the full swing of their energy, unlike in, let's say, in England, where they have to wait until the old king has died. So this is really a nice opportunity with the whole family and to bring Luxembourg to the future.
All right, viewers, with that, it's a wrap on this bulletin. More news and updates on the other side. Stay tuned on NewsX World.